Okay, welcome to our study of the hand for this week. So what I'll be doing is showing you the top and bottom, which is already pre-drawn here just for uh, convenience. And from these, I'm not going to be trying to give you like an anatomical breakdown. I think this is more about taking the big important things here from the hand and then distilling them into elements that will be really helpful when we go to digest this information into the actual drawing. So the emphasis here is much more so on the practical. So let's start out just by kind of going through a few things that I always reference and think are tremendously important when working through some of this. So here's our topic, hands. Okay, so I think what would be useful first is just to define everything. And as I go through in terms of defining, what I'm looking to get is as clear a relationship as I can between the function, so what is the hand used for, and then what are the most prominent or predominant forms that support that. These are the things that I'm going to want to really make a part of the overall design process, lay-in process, or look of the hand as I piece it together from gesture and volume and all of these different things. So some of the things here that we would already know is this would be our radius. I always, when I'm drawing the hand, start from here. I'll always get some kind of gesture drawn from the forearm first. So these are always going to be just a continuation into the middle three fingers. So that's how I think of these, and they're approximately the same width here. And then off of these, the small finger and the thumb, I'll change that shape, or I'll add to the shape, that initial shape. And it's something that will be more obvious when we do the practical, but for now just keep it in mind. So in other words, this is where drawings for the hand begin, because you have to have a radius, right, and an ulna in order to support the idea of a wrist, or that the idea of the hand just isn't kind of floating. So we don't want floating hands, we want them connected to something, and that something specifically should be the bones of your forearm. So just as a reminder, this is the ulna, and that'll be evident in most of the examples in terms of the drawings, because it's this styloid process is pronounced and pushing against the skin, whereas the radius, I think, is much more subtle. It's kind of harder to see this because there's muscle covering, but you would know that that's there because it's always going to be on the thumb side. So that's going to be there. Okay, so that's my starting point, and then as I go through from the carpal to the tip of the finger, I think we should also kind of map out in a very broad sense what the proportions are. So let's say this is the start, this is the bottom of the finger, and we'll make this kind of an ellipse so that it could match in a really simplified way. So imagine that this is a simplification of this whole thing. So it's kind of like an envelope for it. So as we start out, I'm going to be breaking it into half. That halfway between wrist and fingertip is the knuckle. So that's what I want to keep as a reference just for now. Okay, so in terms of the overall, let's just think of this as our halfway point. Now as I start this, I'm going to break the upper half into thirds. So if you want, you could use 2 lines to try to get that into 3 equal parts. This very top, so just this part, this upper third is your carpal tunnel. And this is going to be that transitional area from the wrist into the palm. So that's 1/3. So if I'm thinking of it here, that would be this area. So sometimes I'll just draw, like a little egg or an oval, something as a placeholder. I don't care that it's perfectly drawn. It doesn't do me any practical good in terms of laying in a hand drawing to duplicate the look of the carpal tunnel and the skeleton. Remember, I'm trying to abstract from what's actually there to give some kind of process that can be digested into shape or line. So why is this important specifically? The carpal tunnel is important. So this is, remember, a top view, and I want to show it from a front view over here as well. So the carpal tunnel is important because it provides this bridge structure. So if we were to see the hand coming out towards us, the carpal tunnel really is, as its name would suggest, it creates a tunnel, right? So this would be the top in terms of the diagram. This would be the bottom. And so underneath you would have like a retinaculum or a bracelet, think, and then all of the tendons from the flexors would be underneath and kind of trapped in there. And then you would have tendons on the top that kind of rest across the top of the bone. So the structure of the bone here is absolutely crucial, right? If we were to think of the functionality of the hand as something that is capable of a wide array of tasks that are really delicate and complex, this is the form that conditions and allows for those things to take place. So when we talk about function and form, this is the form that in every part that follows, so metacarpal, finger, I'm always looking to leave echoes of this design in the rest. So for example, if we were to give a look of the metacarpals here, and I'm going to do like, let's say, same hand, so it's same as this one with the thumb on the left, it's just now looking or raising forward. Whoops. So knuckle, and then middle finger, ring finger, pinky finger. So one thing that we'll find is that all of the metacarpal, as they come from the carpal tunnel, sit on this high to low, and the peak of that is the middle finger, and then from there it kind of drops back down to the thumb. And this is something that you could just look at your own hand and see, or better yet, try putting the pencil that you're drawing or taking notes with on the top of your palm, and you're going to see it's not going to balance very well, or you could at very least find that there's this clear plane that goes up and then back down, with the middle finger being that apex point. So that's what's happening as the metacarpal actually hits and attaches with the carpal tunnel. And then every time we have another intersection at a knuckle, that's going to be reflected or echoed. Right? So here it's at the end of the knuckles. It would again be at the proximal joint, or the first knuckle, then the distal, then the end. So this is something that we want to always keep in mind, with the thumb being somewhat of an exception because it's a saddle joint. It doesn't always have to obey the organization of the others. So we did like a few more. So here would be into the second. We can just see how, unless there's some dramatic types of bends or something, that all of these knuckles continue to fall on waves or arcs. And that's a really important kind of design principle. What I would also put behind this is an indication of the radius and the ulna, and here it would be looking to get some kind of box or a 2x4 shape that would allow me to start the hand, so kind of a angular structure. Okay, so hopefully that gives a little bit of an indication as to the importance of the form, and I'm going to give it a bit of a highlighting so that it feels memorable. So what I would like for this to have is just a way to stick out to you a bit. Okay, so I'm just going to color in this area. This will be our reminder for how crucial an area this is. So that's carpal tunnel front view. Here it is diagrammatic, in proportion reminder, and then this is what I'm thinking of it for that top view. Okay, so that's 1/3, which means that as we progress down the hand, I'm going to have the next area prior to the midpoint as the metacarpal. Okay, so when we did this top view here, I wanted to get that idea of the rise and fall. It's a little bit harder to do from the top, but here let's start from the middle finger, and I'm going to draw kind of these designs for the knuckles. So the designs that you should be thinking about here in terms of practical, again, don't worry about trying to copy the skeleton. Just do your best to get something that would be in your design idea or language of drawing. What is the most kind of practical simplification for what's there? The skeleton, I think, can sometimes be something that mystifies or becomes a hindrance to students because it's overly complicated and hard to make sense of often. So I use here in my approach to the knuckles squares, right? So top and bottom, and then in between just a straight or a shaft to the bone. So think of every limb, arm, upper, lower, leg, upper, lower. It's always thick, thin, thick. The unique and interesting aspects of the hand is that the fingers is that those squares are really more like little cylinders, or you could even go one step further and draw them as little thimbles or spools, and that little area of gap is where tendons can sit. But we always have this thick and then thin, right? And then we have it again here. So this maybe would be like a little bit more of an advanced way of thinking them that includes a perspective, and more than that, an organic perspective. But do whatever is comfortable. This is just a language more or less of notation, since we're going to be developing perspectives on top of these. But this is something like what I would understand that I'm seeing. So in total, your metacarpal, if the carpal tunnel is 1/3, your metacarpal is 2/3 of that upper half. And here what I'm trying to do is just show them placed. So important for this area, or something that I try to make sure I show when doing my hand drawings from really any view. So here's is that you can see it in this, that as it moves, or as the bones of the metacarpal move away from that center or the middle finger, they all spoke out or kind of create a spoke wheel pattern away. So even though the hand is not symmetrical, if it's useful, you can think of this as a midline, or kind of a center line for the hand, a symmetry line. And from that, the bones of the metacarpal, each time they move further away, kind of animate as if they're spokes on a wheel. So the reason I would force this as a description is because it has a really beautiful sense of rhythm, right, or motion to it, that gives the hand, which I think an early thing for people to do with the hand is overemphasize symmetry and regularity, and so the hand can look really stiff or kind of static, like overly developed, too many contours resulting in too muddled of a shape. And so in this area, I would imagine the palm, or the top, from the carpal tunnel, center line for the middle finger. Think of this as just spokes that always expand. Or think of like rays from a happy sun, right, if you need something uplifting for today, right? But they all have this swing. And look at the swing. It's still going to be apex at the middle finger. So this is the echo of the carpal tunnel, right? So that's me including that important form effect into the design, so that I'm always calling attention to functional qualities, or the functional quality of the hand. So then let's do a last one, and it would be doing the same, small finger. So that is my way of conceptualizing or trying to understand this as the skeleton. Now what I'm going to do when it comes time to drawing is edit this into a perspective or to a volume, but I would still want to at some point have this in mind so that I could come back to it in order to make it look more organic, right? Because as you know, the 3D or the architectural development of the figure can sometimes feel, or always feel, a little bit stiff or robotic. So my first step is to find those perspectives, my second step is to soften them. Okay, so we have carpal, metacarpal, and now fingers, or phalanges. So spelled like this, which is in reference to the plural, or this would be the singular, to say one finger. And then for each, minus the thumb, I'll have a proximal, so just meaning a first, a middle, and a distal. So first, second, last. Thumb will just have a proximal and a distal. So here's where I think people also struggle with the hand, especially when it's foreshortened. So in this view, this top-down view, wrist to knuckle should be equal to knuckle to finger, or the tip of the finger. So this is your halfway point. It's an important moment of division. I always see this get longer, or much longer, especially when something's foreshortened. And I don't know why, but it's a good, or it's an important reminder to make sure that you're not doing that. The way that you would avoid that is, like I did here, you could limit. So if you take that distance and then just try to copy it down, then you could chop off wherever you think it ends. Right? And so oftentimes when I do this, it abbreviates gesture, kind of like I did here, brought it up some. And then I think maybe it could be that there's a confusion in the separation of the digits. So in the digits, I always use a 3:2 ratio, or if that's confusing, you could say every digit gets like smaller by roughly a third. So let's say we take the middle finger, for example, and let's do, could maybe use a different color just to help this stand out some. So the design is going to continue. It'll be exactly the same in terms of the thick to thin to thick. So here's knuckle. Right, so square. Then we go down to the end of the proximal. And so one thing you could do is, if you've decided that this is an appropriate length for that section, then if I break that into 3 equal, then 2 of those 3, so this much, would be equal to the length of the next. So I could just kind of move that down in terms of the length. So you could use it, if this is too mechanical or kind of bizarre in terms of an approach, then just think a third shorter. But every digit has to get progressively shorter as it's moving down. So even though the fingers are the longest, right, they're the longest measurement or piece of this whole, each bone progressively gets shorter within. Okay, so I'm sure that makes sense. Look out at what else is happening in terms of the forms as something that develops functionality. The hand is a progression from the smallest to the largest. So it goes small, medium, large. And that's kind of a great character design lesson, isn't it? Right, where we have in like a lot of character designers use big, medium, and small shapes to design with. And your eye will track the smaller shapes, the smaller details for focal points. And a lot of that can just be taken from nature, right? The way that natural form is designed or developed. It's also a principle in composing, like in composition or value or color. Specifically, you would see in like color compositions a small area of saturated color, a medium area of mildly saturated or slightly grayed, and then your largest sections of muted color. And so you'd have that eye tracking towards the most saturated area. So that's a bit of a tangent. I apologize for that. So we have our 3:2. The other thing that I want to make sure I call your attention to in terms of the gesture of the bone, that's the proportion of the bone. The gesture of the bone for the hand is that to this middle finger, the other bones all have a gesture back in. So just to give you a better drawing of that here, and you can look at your own hand for this, right? So just hold up your hand to your face, look at the top, not too close to your face, and you'll notice that all of the bones in your fingers just have a subtle arcing that is back in towards the middle. Right, so it's just kind of like this really elegant gesture where everything bends back in, which I guess it seems obvious, or it sounds obvious, right? That our fingers aren't kind of spread out with a lot of room or space in between. But in terms of the design, something that is natural that I think gets missed by people when they're doing their hand drawings, this would definitely be one of them. That these bones have that natural gesture back inward. Right? And I'm over exaggerating here to make the point, but it is always something that I want students to see, because it brings out that, that realism. I mean, I would consider the realism of the hand to be picking up on some of the subtlety of these designs in the skeleton. And then same thing with the small finger. It's also a corrective to the first, right? If you look at the metacarpals, at how they all expand, right? All of these up here are the spoke pattern, everything's spreading, then the fingers correct for it, right? And how everything is brought back in towards the center line. So, and then each one of these, in terms of double checking, I'm not doing it too much here, but 3 to 2, right? Each is progressively getting shorter. A double check would say that between, again, all these knuckles, so if I start thinking about lining these up, I should follow or see the echoes of that carpal tunnel in here, right? So that there's still that swing, or the idea that all of the knuckles can line up on a C curve or on an S curve, as a reflection or echo of the structure of the carpal tunnel, right? That they're all built from that. Lastly, the thumb will be with all the same characteristics as the other fingers. First, it sits at a slightly different perspective, right? So while I tried to draw all the the metacarpals there as top down, in this view, seeing the thumb, I would show it slightly in, or kind of 3/4, just to give it the impression that it's moving in a slightly different perspective. And then the end of the thumb, I always stop before the end of the proximal. Whoops. Right, so I would keep it higher than that point. And that would just be, again, first proximal and then distal. So 1, 2. And that's going to end. So these are the important elements of the skeleton that I'll always try to bring attention to, at least from this top, and that I'll recycle into the way that the hand is made in terms of the drawing, following the more perspective-based lay-in. So here, having finished this top, let's take a look at the contrasting elements or features of what's going on the bottom of the hand.